So, friends, the question I've gotten most often across all platforms in recent days is this: what is likely to happen to Air Force Major Jason Watson, who chose to protest a corrupt presidential administration and a criminal civilian leadership of the United States military by standing on the steps of the U.S. Capitol in full military uniform, holding a sign that said, "Impeach, convict, remove," for which he was arrested. So, friends, the question becomes, what price bravery? I just sat down with military law expert, law professor, and retired Army JAG officer Dan Maurer to discuss.
这是一套连 ChatGPT 都推荐的英语学习方式，教学10年，我发现大多数学员学英文总
Officer Dan Maurer to discuss.
As you can see, we have our military law expert back with us, Dan Maurer. And Dan, as you probably recall, is a retired Army JAG officer. He is a law professor. He really is a true military law expert. And I always appreciate when he breaks down the legal issues of the day pertaining to the military. One of the most frequently asked questions that I've gotten over the past, I would say, week across all platforms is what is going to happen? What is likely to happen to Major Jason Watson? He's an active duty Air Force officer who we all saw standing in uniform, holding up a sign on the steps of the U.S. Capitol that said, "Impeach, convict, removed." And of course, he was promptly arrested for, protesting without a permit and not kind of dispersing after he had been told by the Capitol Police to disperse, to leave 3 times. He was arrested. So many people, first of all, are, protesting that said, "Impeach, convict, removed." And of course, he was prompt officer who we all saw standing in uniform, holding up a sign on the steps of the U.S. Capitol that said, "Impeach, convict, removed." And of course, he was promptly arrested, who we all saw standing in uniform, holding up a sign on the steps of the U.S. Capitol that said, "Impeach, convict, removed." And of course, he was promptly arrested for, protesting without a permit and not kind of dispersing after he had been told by the Capitol Police to disperse, to leave 3 times. He was arrested. So many people, first of all, I think they appreciated his voice, his protest, and the sentiments he expressed. But people want to know what might happen to him now. And the perfect person to answer that question is Dan Maurer. So, Dan, thank you for jumping on and taking us through this kind of interesting and not necessarily intuitive area of the law. So let's start with this. Active duty military members have some First Amendment free speech rights, but not all. Moved, and of course, he was promptly arrested for expert. And I always appreciate when he breaks down the legal issues of the day pertaining to the military. One of the most frequently asked questions that I've gotten over the past, I would say, week across all platforms is what is going to happen? What is likely to happen to Major Jason Watson? He's an active duty Air Force officer who we all saw standing in uniform, holding up a sign on the steps of the U.S. Capitol that said, "Impeach, convict, removed." And of course, he was promptly arrested for, protesting without a permit and not kind of dispersing after he had been told by the Capitol Police to disperse, to leave 3 times. He was arrested. So many people, first of all, I think they appreciated his voice, his protest, and the sentiments he expressed. But people want to know what might happen to him now. And the perfect person to answer that question is Dan Maurer. So Dan, thank you for jumping on and taking us through this kind of interesting and not necessarily intuitive area of the law. So let's start with this. Active duty military members have some First Amendment free speech rights, but not all of the free speech rights that we enjoy as civilians. So can you give us a quick breakdown, a quick tutorial about how the First Amendment free speech rights differ when it comes to active duty military members?
Sure. So the first default rule is in service, active duty members, officer enlisted, no matter what service they're in, Marines, Navy, Air Force, Army, whatever it might be, have your First Amendment rights. That's the Supreme Court has said as much. You have a First Amendment protection. You don't give that up simply because you volunteered to put the uniform on for the country. However, the Supreme Court has also said numerous times that those rights are somewhat cabined, they're narrowed, they're shrunken a little bit when it comes to those who voluntarily serve. And that has a rationale behind it. It's not because the Supreme Court is super liberal and doesn't like the conservative military. It's not that simple at all. The reason is a matter of command and control. It's a matter of civilian supremacy over the military. These high idealistic nature of our government kind of things go into why the military has a foreshortened kind of free speech right. So there were things that I could have done while I was on active duty, that you could have done while you were on active duty, that anyone else can do. They can write op-eds. You can vote, certainly. You can donate to campaigns. You can go to rallies. You can do those basic things that every citizen can do. But you can't do it while you're in uniform, for example. And that is because there is a concern that partisan activity, like going to a rally, going to a campaign speech, that kind of behavior while you're in uniform looks like the military is endorsing that position. And that position might be contrary to what the commander in chief is doing or saying. And that can be divisive. That can be problematic when you have this hierarchical chain of command that goes from the president as commander in chief under the Constitution to the Secretary of Defense to the military commanders, all the way down to Joe, Private E1. It's a hierarchy. It's an autocracy. It's authoritarian. That's the nature of the military. And so when you have a subordinate publicly saying things that are contrary to the president or SecDef in a political way, disagreeing with a policy position, arguing that we shouldn't do X, Y, Z, shouldn't be invading Iran or whatever, that is problematic. Now, I've seen much commentary about how this major is a hero, and I can understand that sentiment. I really can, because it's not often that you see someone who works for the administration pushing back publicly and saying, no, what you're doing is wrong. What you're doing is unlawful. What you're doing is impeachable. That those things being said by members of the administration, and every member of the military is essentially a member of the administration, is rare. And it takes courage to do that. Major Watson almost certainly knew that he was going to go to jail, or at least detained and arrested, and at least be under investigation by the military for what he was doing. He's not an idiot. He's experienced, and he knows what the rules are. And the rules say you can't do what he did. But he did it anyway, right? That's his protest. It's not just holding up the sign on the Capitol steps that says impeach, convict, and remove. That is protest. But doing it in uniform, knowing that it's against the rules for the military to do that, that is a form of protest too. And he had to feel really strongly about his position in order to do that. So I give him credit for being that passionate about something in civic life. However, I also know that that comes with some significant risks. One risk is the arrest by the Capitol Police and charged with a crime under the DC Code, which that was dropped the next day. It was a misdemeanor charge for basically congregating in a public space without permission and then refusing to leave once you've been warned not to be there anymore. So that was dropped. But just because the DC court system is not going to address this issue, Major Watson is not out of jail. Right.
And let me just interject here for a minute, Dan. I don't want to interrupt your flow, but because I was a federal prosecutor in Washington, D.C., I was also a local prosecutor because we have that unique jurisdictional responsibility. We're the feds, we do all federal prosecutions, and we're the locals. We do all the local prosecuting in the Superior Court for the District of Columbia. So what would have happened when he was arrested on the steps of the Capitol by civilian law enforcement, the Capitol Police, that case would have been brought to my former office, the DC U.S. Attorney's Office, and we would have had to have made what we call a papering decision. The words of art that we use is if we decide to charge somebody after the police, any police force has arrested the person, we call it papering the case. If we decline to charge somebody, we call it no papering the case. And what the prosecutors in DC did was they no papered the case. Now, they could have done that for any number of reasons, but I suspect, because I've been in this exact situation when I was screening criminal cases as part of the intake process, we probably deferred to the military. We probably said, listen, even if this is an offense in violation of the local laws of DC, that he was basically protesting on the steps of the Capitol without a permit after being told to leave, we're not going to bring a charge in civilian court. We're going to defer to the military and let them to decide whether to do anything against Major Watson, either by way of criminal charges, a court martial, or by way of administrative sanctions. So that's why I'm guessing we decided not to charge and we just left it in the hands of the military. So take it from there. What is he facing militarily, either administratively or criminally, as a result of this conduct?
You're correct, absolutely, and it's the same everywhere else in every other jurisdiction. The civilians will often defer to the military because the process it tends to be swifter, and there are more resources that the military can throw at that particular case, and there are more options. So one of the options is do nothing, just like the civilian prosecutor. You could do nothing with this. The chain of command could say, we regret what happened. This shouldn't have happened. Don't do it again. But we're not going to pursue anything like administrative or criminal. Or it could be administrative. It could lead to a written admonishment, a reprimand, which doesn't seem like much other than a slap on the wrist. But when that goes in one's personal file as an officer, that essentially ends his career. He's not going to be promoted past that point. It can also justify what's called an officer board, which means essentially a way for the military to fire him before he is eligible for retirement, separating him involuntarily from the service. That is an administrative action that can happen. There is some due process there, but not nearly as much as you would get as a defendant in a criminal. And alternatively, they could pursue charges under a court martial. And there are a number of different things that they could charge him with. One is violating the Department of Defense regulation that talks about partisan behavior